Well, hello. Before we get into our writing stream tonight, I figured I would answer the Discord question in a little more detail than I normally do. Because I thought it was a good question, which is, how do writers handle long transitions between time in different forms and between characters? So yeah. Let's talk. I think one of the first examples I wanted to give so if you ever want to learn about transitions, if you ever want to learn about how to do scene transitions, whether you're a novel writer or anybody, read the screenplay The Fifth Element. And we have a really great example here because they're doing what's called matching to make this time moment go. So if you remember, there's kind of this big scene in the beginning of Fifth Element where there's an explorer uncovering this hidden secret, and there's a key handed off among peril and stuff like that. So that kind of goes to the first rule: is this whole previous scene, the past scene, the scene in the past, has conflict, and it's very self-enclosed, but it does suggest what's going on in the future. It suggests that there is a bigger conflict to come in the future. So, we have this discovery, these aliens coming down. There's a enclosed, encapsulated scene with conflict, characters, stakes, and then it creates a mystery that extends into the future. And then also when you get to the more tactical aspects of what they're doing in Fifth Element, and don't worry, I'm going to give another example for those who are novelists, but we'll see almost the same principles happen for the prologue type chapters. This is kind of a prologue for this screenplay, where we, let's just read this section, which is the time transition. Exterior desert day. Okay, so interior temple room day. The room filled with sand. The priest's body is soon buried. Exterior desert day. Huge ship. Main hatch closes. Temple day. The ship lifts and speeds away. Omar emerges from the temple, gaping as it vanishes into the sky. A gigantic shooting star flashes above the pyramids. A ship passes in front of us, heads for the stars, disappearing at unbelievable speed. The background is a star-spattered cosmos. Boom, 500 years later, another spaceship, more modern, fills the screen, a warship belonging to the Federal Army. So that is the transition. You can see what they're doing, at least in screenplay formatting, which if you ever want to learn about transitions, read screenplays. They have to have the most demanding transitions. But we see here that they're doing a matching technique where they're matching space to space. I bet if you looked around later, you would see other ones. Oh man, I don't want to go through this, but the other example I wanted to show you, because it's kind of a weirdly formatted screenplay, so it's kind of hard to tell where the big transitions are, is I wanted to show you all a little excerpt from Way of Kings. See if I can get it to work. Goodle-a-doot, doot, doot, boop. Yay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to just expand that out here. All right. So again, we're seeing some of the same principles, right? So in the first so he does two, and this is an example I used well. Someone asked this question on stream, but we're seeing it again here. He uses two prologues, and they both operate similarly. And this one especially operates similar to the Fifth Element, where we see this kind of self-enclosed moment where these kind of demigods, the heralds, are putting their blades away, and they're kind of doing this shameful act. So it's a self-enclosed scene where it's one of them finally agreeing to do this shameful thing. You're broken too, they all are. So this last one finally caves. They rely upon us. We're all they have. So there's a scene, there's a conflict. There's one final person that needs convincing. I'll put this back on top. Boop. So we're seeing that. There's one Should shrink that just a little bit so it's all the way in the screen. There we go. So there's one final person that needs convincing. Better that one man should step. So it's a conflict. It's a conflict-driven scene, and it's self-enclosed, and it's doing the same thing as Fifth Element. It is creating a mystery that is unresolved into the future. So they've done this thing. One of them, one who was lost, the one they had abandoned, forgive us, Calic thought, then left. That something big and momentous happened. It was a self-enclosed scene, but it seems to have very strong implications for the future. And that's what these prologues and these large time gaps tend to have if they're done well, which is a something that goes into the future and embodies a bigger conflict and kind of suggests that bigger conflict. And we see that again in the next chapter, which is another prologue, funny enough. Which is a viewpoint character, a different viewpoint character that we don't see. We see Seth. We only get his viewpoint. And he goes in and slaughters everyone and is very badass, or excuse me, awesome. I shouldn't swear on instructional ones. Oh, but yes, let me make sure that I'm hearing your questions if you have any. Let's see. Question hype. Yes. What up, 667, Grover, and Cold Front? So we see, here we go. We see, yes, okay, great, Brandon Sanderson. You're very nice. Oh my gosh. What just happened? It just totally juked. Yeah, here we go. End of book 1. How did it jump to the end? Part 1, that's what I want. There we go. Gosh, what the heck? Spoilers. When you realize that when you mentioned that, I realized I did some of that in my own stories. Yeah, the transition between time periods and characters, a ton. I think I have Game of Thrones on here. I used to have Game of Thrones. That's another great example of jumping between characters. I don't know if I have it on here though. But he does a very good job of closing each chapter. Each chapter is a scene. It's a self-enclosed entity, and it's functioning on its own. So I think that's especially important in books that have multiple viewpoint characters. Each viewpoint character's chapter needs to almost be its own story. There is a much higher demand. You can't do, so what I do in my book, because it's a single viewpoint character, is I can do these big cliffhangers in the chapters, or chapter break at like a big high point. That's much less doable in a multiple viewpoint story, because each viewpoint needs to be self-enclosed, so that when the reader is separated from that viewpoint for a while, even if there is a quasi-cliffhanger, when that reader is separated from that viewpoint for a while, they're not kind of like, what the heck? And we can actually maybe see an example in this. This might be a great example. Because there are a bunch of viewpoint characters here too. To Seth's brother, his dying request was sacred. Yeah. The Pashrendi, that makes no sense. Nothing makes sense anymore, Seth whispered, tucking the strange fear away. It's all unraveling. So another big piece of foreshadowing for the future. So again, and that's what you're seeing, that's especially the end of these chapters. You're seeing this sense of this world starting to kind of come undone in different time phases. And this is another great example of that. Nothing makes sense anymore, Seth. And this is the guy who just slaughtered everyone. And he's being very amicable and very kind to this person he just killed, which is also a interesting attribute of this assassin. I think those are things that you have to think about. This is like the friendliest assassin. He's like very kind and respectful to this dying person. Nothing made sense anymore, Seth whispered. It's all unraveling. I'm sorry, King of Lethe. I doubt that you care. Not anymore, at least. So he's apologizing, very guilt-ridden for his assassination. Another thing, this is a very complex character and a very well-drawn character, but that's something that's coming in at the first time we see that character, is this tension. And that's what brings the readers forward, both in the world. So we see the world tension being set up here, where, he says, it's all unraveling. That's the world tension being set up. But then we have this character tension being set up, where, you know, he's being very kind, he's being very amicable to this person he just murdered. And I think those are really important because you need both. You need to be developing characters as soon as you can in your story. So you have to be Jumbo Pin. Welcome. Haven't got you over here. Glad to see you're still writing. Well, wonderful to have you, and I'm glad to see you again. And hopefully your writing is going well as well. Let me just check chat because I'm a little bit behind. That's how I write it. Each character happening as a beginning, middle, and end. Imagine ending scenes where a commercial break would appear. Yeah, this may be way off topic, but I feel like no unpublished works get critiqued differently. Something that's super nuanced or confusing is allowed in a published work more often. But if it's not yet, then it's looked at as unclear or done incorrectly. It depends. It depends on the genre. So, like, in a fantasy sci-fi genre, that is not something. That's not a genre where you're going to see a lot of prose level experimentation. You're not going to see a writer trying to be anti-story, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier about some of the direction aspects of literature is heading, like the more kind of academic style of literature, like the very modernish, like the modern style of literature is heading. So yeah, and in fantasy sci-fi, I feel like you can't get away with as much. But the problem I see, so this is what I invariably see in published work versus unpublished work, and I sometimes see it in published work. There's a book called The Shades of Magic. The first book was great, but the second two were, I think, made a lot of mistakes and a lot of really obvious mistakes. And I think the only reason those got published was because the first one had already gotten published. So I think if I was a publisher and I read the second book, I would have sent it back to the author and said, do better. Or these are some things you need to improve before this is ready for the big times. So I actually have a lot of examples of published books that I don't enjoy or I don't think have executed craft well in certain areas. This one, for example, though, I think the thing that makes this work and the mysteries he's setting up here work is because he's had an enthralling, self-enclosed scene that is understandable. That's one of the big challenges with prologues, and that's why I caution beginning writers against prologues, because all beginning writers sometimes I see do is they focus only on the foreshadowing and they forget that they need a scene with conflict, stakes, interesting characters, or else it just crumbles and you just don't care. You know, there's no reason for the foreshadowing to mean anything to you because you have to make the reader care from the beginning. I actually think that's my complaint with Way of Kings. I think he does a decent, he does like, you know, just above the line in that in Way of Kings, but it's close. Like he almost has so much he's dumping in terms of world building into the story that it almost sags under that weight. I think he does pull it off. Danielle, or the Foxy lady, would disagree. She would say no. She thought it was really boring, the first book. With that, Seth escaped in the night. He left the king's shard blade. He had no use for it. The blade Seth carried was already curse enough. Okay, so we get that complicated character, and it's setting ahead, and then yeah, here we go. That's when it actually starts, and then we get another 5 years earlier, or 5 years later. I'm gonna die, aren't I? So we're immediately starting with, and then the next chapter, and this is something I think that's worth acknowledging it. I read like 10% of it, and I was bored. See, exactly. So that's one of those examples where I think he was playing his world building very close to the line against his plot development and conflict in this series. And the fact that you said you're bored, that's a valid opinion. And it's one that I don't think paid off. But, you know, he's trying, and these are the techniques you're seeing, because like the first chapter we see that comes after. So we have the big prologue, we have the second prologue, and then the first chapter we get after that, we have life and death stakes. So that is such a lesson. The chapter after that prologue, the stakes need to be high. It needs to be engaging. It needs to be like immediately happening. And that's what we see here, right? So he's saying, okay, this was a self-enclosed chapter. It had its own mechanism of conflict, stakes, urgency, and then boom, we have another one. Conflict, stakes, urgency. And that previous chapter did serve its purpose in doing some setup. Entire age in Wheel of Time. Do you know what book it's in? I only own the first 2 books, so those would be the only ones, or the first 3 books. Those are the only ones I could reference. But yeah, so let me see if I can find one more example. Turn off my Kindle. I'm debating on going back through Fifth Element or finding something else from my library with a prologue with multiple viewpoint characters. Let's think. Like I say, those are all single. Everything is single viewpoint, except for I read this Lightbringer series, but I did not like it at all. So I'm not gonna talk about that because I don't think it was that well done. I liked it, but it was like sort of like at the end, you're like, come on, just end this book already. Man. Unlimited. Where is it? You know, maybe I'll go through Fifth Element here. A lot of them don't. So, like, a lot of books don't. And that's what I was just looking through, like 100 books, because I have them all in my Kindle library pulled up. And that's the thing. A lot of books don't do it. And I think there's a lesson in that as well. Which is, if you don't have to jump time, if you don't have to have a prologue, if you don't have to have a second prologue, don't. I mean, look, even Brandon Sanderson, who's a very gifted writer and who's worked very hard and thought about his craft a lot to become as skilled as he is, he didn't pull it off for some readers in Way of Kings. So that's a very, very important thing. I think this is a good one. Yes. Okay, this is the introduction. I don't know if you've seen the Fifth Element. This is the introduction of Lilu, the Fifth Element. So then we see this big fight go off, and this is the transition from the meta, like this big space, like the government story, to the micro, which is this character who is the Fifth Element. That's his by Brent Weeks. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the Lightbringer, Brent Weeks. Cornelius collapsed into a chair. We are lost. No, Mr. President, the attack was launched by 2 unregistered warships. Close all borders. Declare state of general alert. Yes, sir. Try to contact the Monachiwans. We owe them an explanation. What are we going to do? This is government business now. You ought to go home and get some rest, Father. The President motions his guards to come get Cornelius. I promise to keep you informed. A weary Cornelius leaves the room with David's help. Has the rescue team found any survivors? Exterior red planet. Laboratory. An arm on a surgical cart. So that's why I think if you want to study, and this is a little different because it is film, it is drama, it's how they're doing transitions there. But man, what a sharp transition. Has the rescue team found any survivors? Boom. Cut to an arm. And that's a survivor in this world. That does so much work for the story. So much work. And there's like every single big scene transition does this in Fifth Element. That's why I didn't have to look very hard to find another one, because it's packed. Let me see. Police car, New York streets day. Car makes a U-turn. So yeah, here's another one. Exterior New York street is when they're driving around. The police car roars, silent screaming and low, hidden vertically behind the billboard, seeing nothing. Please drive away. Corbin, we'll wait until things quiet down. You mind? The girl grabs his shirt collar and pulls him off and whispers in his ear, Priest! You're not that bad. Come on, we'll get you to a doctor. See, great dialogue as well. That is really good dialogue. The girl hands him the handle of the case, stuck with 3 Egyptian sons. Vito Cornelius, priest. Vito Cornelius? The girl nods, then faints. Corman is somewhat lost, faced with so much mystery. And then Cornelius's apartment. So we cut right to the result. Door opens. Corbin is there with the unconscious girl in his arms. Excuse me, I'm looking for a priest. Weddings are on one floor down. Congratulations. Cornelius closes the door. The doorbell rings again. She's not my bride. She's my fair. And then we get the thing. So trim. So if you're gonna do the more advanced, this is probably more advanced than what Brandon Sanderson is doing in terms of like these snap cut transitions, things that are taking the ideas from the last scene and advancing the plot forward. Very useful to do things like this if you have one viewpoint. If you have multiple viewpoints, you might be looking for an approach more like Brandon Sanderson's. Right, so the first book after the prologue, I can post it, it's small. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave birth to it comes again. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a solid paragraph. I read Wheel of Time. I mean, but that's the thing. I feel like he had so much world building that some of the plot just kind of fizzles and so many characters that some of them just aren't interesting. And that's another risk. I think if you have the option to have fewer characters, fewer time jumps, do it. Do less, but better. It's like those restaurants. This is a great example. Those restaurants with a bunch of stuff on the menu. That's when you know that 90% of that stuff is not going to be the best thing ever. But you go to In-N-Out, and they have 3 things on the menu. They have the burger, the double, and the whatever else. They have like a few things on the menu. But they do the burgers at In-N-Out really well. Be In-N-Out. Don't be like freaking Joe's Cafe with like 1,000 things on the menu as a writer. Please. Especially when you're developing as a writer. Yeah. 5 to 6 books for Ren to become interesting and not a complete idiot. Some readers will survive that. I couldn't. I got just so fatigued by that book, and just the characters were so undeveloped. Or Whataburger is king. Fair enough. I do love Whataburger. I'm from Texas, so I love Whataburger. I always get it whenever I go home. Yes. The Wheel of Time just takes too long to get good. Yes, Fat Burger. All right. Anyway, so that's the conclusion of the question. That was a little bit longer. So I thought, I was like, I can't do this in a clip as much as I would like to. So I figured I would do a full mini stream, a mini series of answering this question. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to writing. So I'm going to pause this, save this video, and then hopefully you all can reference it on whatever it is. On YouTube, and I'll post it in Discord. But yeah, hopefully that helps. I'll be back on in 2 seconds. I just need to change the stream titles and do all that stuff and actually stop the video so Twitch doesn't keep reporting. There are books like Malazan, Book of the Fallen, that over 15 POVs and pull it off amazingly. Well, Malazan lost me at book 2. I tried. I really tried. Book 1, fantastic. Book 2, I hated Ferulian or whatever her name was. And like the mean bad guy, I just couldn't care. Yeah, anyways. And then nothing really developed. It was like, oh, like Kalam is still Kalam, and he's doing assassin things, and he's really magical. And you're like, okay, great. I don't care. Just make something happen in the world. Nothing changed. It was a book without stakes, it felt like. Except for like this big battle at the end, which at that point, I didn't know who was who, and I didn't care. A lot of people's faves, yeah. Well, maybe I should try book 3, but I haven't had the heart. I'm too scared. It's going to be boring. I like to still think the mind resembles Malazan in the way it's dark, but the characters are still unique and comedic sometimes. That's true. I mean, it was good. Like, it wasn't like a bad book. It was beautifully written. His prose is amazing. I just was like, I kind of just want to read something I enjoy, not something I have to slog through. That's what most of the readers you're going to run into want. They just want something they're going to enjoy. And if a writer can't make their message something that's enjoyable and entertaining, writers got to think pretty hard about that. Anyways, I'm going to turn this off, do a few little tweaks on Twitch to make sure that this gets organized in the way I think it's supposed to be, and we'll talk again soon.